All right, Lawrence, we're live.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. November the 4th, already amazing. And we are so close to the end of the year again, and yet we still have lots of opportunity. So let's get on it. Obviously, the slaughterhouse of failure is not in our destiny. We will persist until we succeed. That's Augmandino with a little we and teamwork in it. So we've been talking about some of the attributes and traits that leadership has to have. And, we've gone through many different ones in the last few weeks, ability to maintain positive attitude, openness to anything, curiosity of a child, persuasion of anything, of natural, is natural thing for you, creativity, motivated on your own, resiliency and tenacity, and so on. So today we're going to talk about taking ownership of everything that happens. So taking ownership of everything that happens. This is something that as leaders, and I say leaders, you don't need to be leader of a huge corporation. You could be leader of your own life, leader of your family, leader of the community, leader of a business. Leadership is within oneself. Leadership is who you are, or you should be, rather than just be a follower.
Lawrence, you're muted. I'm sorry. I think I did that.
Got Dan. Okay, I
apologize for that. I was going through muting people, and I wasn't looking at who I was muting.
No, that's fine.
So
Go ahead.
I apologize. Yeah, so like Lawrence said, you can be leaderships of your life, leader of your family. All of these different things. So everything that we've been talking to should fit in with everyday life, not only just your business life. So when I start thinking about ownership and taking ownership, I start thinking about taking initiative, having accountability for my actions, having ownership over my commitment level, my dedication to the business or my life, thinking about my daily activities and having ownership over those, whether I'm getting up and performing my daily activities, creating a schedule for my daily activities, and then ultimately, talking about leadership. So, accountability is a trait that gets ignored a lot of times in business, and it's forgotten by a lot of business owners. So as a business owner, you have to understand that everything is and will be your fault. If you don't get up and perform those daily activities, if you're not learning enough about the products or the scanner to be able to present it, if you're not available for your teammates for three-way calls, and that's one of the things for me I take extreme ownership over is my actions when I'm doing three-way calls, because I know that people are counting on me to come through on those three-way calls. And then, being accountable is about being responsible for the result of our actions. And ownership's about initiative. Accountability is about following through. It's not just about the individual and their goals or commitments. It's about acknowledging that your actions affect your other team members. So it's not always about taking ownership of yourself and what you're doing and your actions. It's taking responsibility for those of your team members and those that you're leading as well. So being accountable tells others that you can trust me, and I'm going to do what I tell you I'm going to do. And so, going back to the three-way calls in our particular business, I take that very, very seriously. When somebody calls me and asks me if I can get on a call, I have to instantly put myself in that frame of mind where I'm going to be talking about the business in a positive light from my personal experience, right? And so I take that very seriously, and I feel that I'm accountable if we have a good result or we have a bad result on those three-way calls.
Yeah, accountability is taking ownership And the theme of what we're talking about, exactly as you say, Dan, is somebody asks you to do a call, you take ownership of that, you're going to do your best. So I think there's some things that I'd like to mention that are a bit out of the way in terms of when we're talking about taking ownership. When things go badly, as you rightly said, Dan, we've always got to sort of, as leaders, everything's going to be our fault anyway. Something happens and it's our fault. We get somebody in the business and the product doesn't arrive, that becomes our fault too. So we just have to deal with these things. However, the thing I want to say is that in order to be able to understand and recognize the problems that we have, we've got to take our ego out the way. The ego is the best friend we've got and the worst enemy we've got. They're both. They're good and bad. It is good and bad. So when we look at a problem, and we've got to be ready to face criticism. We've got to be ready to have the strength and yet the humility to be able to look at the problem, take ownership of it, and even if it's not our fault, got nothing to do with it, but we are expected to, as leaders, take ownership of that problem. And we've got to fix it to the best that we can. And in order to do that, we've got to let the ego aside and look at this from a much, if you clear the ego out, you can look more objectively at something because your emotion is no longer distorted by the ego. So I think it becomes important on that side. And then when we have that problem that we've then got to call on the ego to give us the strength to be able to say, I can fix it. So the ego's got to be a yin and yang thing. At the beginning, you've got to be humble and say, whoa, I got a problem here that I got to fix. And it's my fault, but therefore it's not. But however, I've got to fix it. And then I've got to fix it. I can fix it. I will fix it. And therefore, that's where that comes in. When we're accountable, we're taking the ownership of whatever it is we're doing. I'm just using two examples that are slightly out of the way, but I think it's important that we understand that our own emotion has a huge amount of things to do with how we take ownership of whatever we're doing.
Sometimes you need to be cognizant of your own ego and your strengths and your weaknesses, and sometimes you need to put your ego aside to be able to take ownership and take accountability for things that may or may not be your fault. When I was in medical device sales, I'd be standing in the back of the operating room, and when things didn't go right, when an instrument broke, when something wasn't working the way it was supposed to be working, even though it wasn't my fault, I didn't make the instruments, I didn't make the implants, I was a representative for that company and I had to show leadership. And when something like that happened, they'd turn around and they'd look at, everybody in the room would turn around and they'd look at me, right? And you can't just say, hey, it's not my fault, and walk out of the room. You have to take ownership and take accountability for something that you're representing, and come up with a resolution to make everything go smoothly. And one of my favorite books right now is a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and Dr. Couples actually put a note in the chat. And for those of you who don't know who Jocko Willink is, he was a Navy SEAL, multiple tours in Iraq, and now he's a consultant along with one of his team members from the Navy SEALs. And they consult with businesses about leadership and what, taking ownership of your business and taking ownership of your leadership. And so there's, one of the things that he says that resonates with me is we need to be accountable for our discipline, and discipline equals freedom. The more disciplined we are, the more that's going to lead to success, that's going to lead to freedom, and whatever freedom means for you. Is it financial freedom? Is it lifestyle freedom, things along those lines. And so I encourage everybody to take a look at that book. leading a team to success means taking responsibility for each and every one of its failures as well. We can't just take, the kudos for when things are going right. We need to take responsibility when things are going wrong, and lead our teams through that. And then, along with leadership and ownership is not only how you lead and how you take ownership, but it's also when you do those things as well, right? Some people don't need leadership on a daily basis. On our team, we're dealing with a lot of medical device sales reps that have been in the business for 30 years, and they don't want to be, at least initially, they don't want to have somebody tell them what to do, because they already know, they've been in the sales game for 30 years. And so they don't feel like they need any leadership. They feel like they're self-starters, and they get up and they do what they need to do to be successful. And a lot of times we find out that that's, this is a different business. It's a completely different animal. And so we need, on our team, I let people figure that out on their own. I tell them about it in the beginning. Look, this is a completely different animal. You're not selling metal and plastic to doctors. It's a completely different sale. And there's more of a sales cycle that goes along with it. You need to use your team members for three-way calls and learn what you need to learn about the technology and the products. And so you're able to properly present it. And, they kind of flounder for a little bit, and they start to come around. So even taking ownership for how they're being introduced to the business and how they're evolving once they come into the business, and taking accountability for that up front is a big part of what we do, or what I do on my team. And so there's, extreme ownership requires a leader to own their team's mistakes and failures as well. It's not just about our own mistakes and failures and our own successes. We need to take responsibility for those for our team as well, and allow them to take ownership of what they're doing. If they're having successes, they need to take ownership of those successes. If they're having failures, they need to take ownership of those failures, and come to us as leaders and ask what they may be doing wrong and how we can help them to overcome those. And we may not have the answers, but the great thing about this business is we have people from so many different walks of life that we can utilize somebody who has those strengths on our team to help folks get past those failures.
No,
I think, I'm sorry, Lawrence, is this the book that Jocko starts out and says, always make your bed?
Yeah.
Okay, so that really resonated with me when
Wait, I don't think
watched
that's the book. Is that the right book?
no,
Is it?
no.
He
No,
doesn't
that's
say that.
Admiral McCrae.
Oh, that's right. That's Admiral McCrae.
That was a
Oh,
general,
okay.
yeah. That was a
Okay.
general. Different
I'm
one.
sorry, I confused the two, but the always make your bed statement that he makes in his speech when he's just kind of giving a motivational speak really resonates, as that's literally the first thing you can accomplish in your day, is to make your bed when you get out of it. So you've already been successful doing one task that you do every single day. Well, first of all, you're not going to get back in it once your pillows are all, once you got all those decorative pillows on it. But before you even do anything, you hop out of the bed, you make it, and look how successful you've already been within the first 5 minutes you're awake. So it's really just helps your attitude. It helps your maybe mindset of achieving goals, because that's the number one task. And as long as you accomplish that, then the day is just full of opportunities for you to continue to tackle. But sorry, I quoted the wrong guy.
That's fine. It was a general that or an admiral that said that. I can't remember right now who it is. But this ownership thing, Dan, and as you were saying about, for example, a lot of the pharma reps that come in and medical device reps who've been a rep for 20 years and they know their stuff. There again, we've got to take ownership of the fact that we're getting them into a new business, and we've got to find the way for them to be coachable. And the way to do that is to ease them out of their ego, because they say, I know all about it. One of them, well, we know, one of them is a person that obviously 20 years in the business, very successful. No, don't try and tell me what to do. I know what to do. And then after 2 months and 2 months, they've done squat, because this is a different animal. there we've got in a very diplomatic, nice, calming way, we've got to ease them off their ego horse and say, look, this is a new thing. Let's try and work this out. And again, and I think Paige just said something too, the validation. This is something that's very important. I just saw the headline there. And it's important that when we take ownership of an issue, a problem, a business, a team, a person, help a person, it's multifaceted. There are a lot of moving parts to it, but we have to try and understand that each one of those is important to whoever we're dealing with, and it becomes something that we've got to solve for the team member and for the team, because again, a team member is also a part of a team. If the one member is not doing well, then the team won't do well. And this is where we look at that peloton that we've talked about. The one team member that has got a problem, we've got to all kind of chip in and help and get that thing sorted out. So taking ownership is a big subject. It's a really big subject. And it starts with how we feel about ourselves and how we can help that person overcome whatever the challenges are. And even if it's not our fault, as I say, we've got a supply chain problem right now. Product doesn't arrive. When you said that everybody in the OR was looking at you when there was a problem, I can just visualize something happening and all these heads turning and looking at you, and you're saying, okay, I'll try and take care of it, rather than, I don't know, this is what it is.
One of the things that I was really good at doing in that space was managing risks before they pop up, managing problems before they pop up. So you need to continually, when you're taking ownership of your business and being accountable for it, you need to not only think about when things are going right, you need to start thinking about when things are going wrong and how you can adjust what you're doing to those things as they pop up. The worst thing I think that you can do is start thinking about those things after they've already popped up. So if you could be a little bit proactive and have take accountability for that and have ideas of how you're going to move forward through those failures, or when things aren't going exactly right, it just makes you more respected as a leader who's taking ownership for your business, because you've thought ahead of how you're going to handle these situations rather than waiting till those situations pop up. Not that there's not going to be occurrences where things pop up that you need to figure out how to manage those, but if you can do your best to try and manage those problems as they pop up, I think it instills a lot of confidence and trust in your team members and whoever's joined you in this business. And as we mentioned, a leader who takes responsibility for failures is of vital success to the team overall. Because they're not wasting their time thinking about, was this my fault? Is this something that I could have done differently? You're taking ownership for that and taking it off of their plate. And then, because of that, pressures, you're always going to have these pressures as a leader. And one of the things, other things that I was really good at in that OR setting was remaining calm and effective in those times of difficulty. And then establishing priorities as to how we're going to get through that, and then taking action. And so that's one of the main reasons I was so successful in that space, is that if somebody turned around and looked at me when things weren't going wrong, I always had one or two solutions to move forward in my head. Because the last thing you want to do when you're in the operating room and somebody's under anesthesia is say, oh, give me 5 minutes to think about it, and we'll come up with a solution. You've always got to have that solution in your head, watching what's going on and thinking about what the next steps are. And if something goes wrong, what you can do to continue.
Well, you see, there's one of the subjects we always talk about as well. we say, how well do you know yourself? Well, who are you? How well do you know yourself? So there, Dan, is a classic example of what you've just said, is being able to stay calm, being able to be analytical, being able to preempt a problem, even if you have it, because you thought about it ahead of time. So this is where knowing yourself becomes extremely important. And those are the three questions I always ask. Who are you? How well do you know yourself? And what do you want? This one is, how well do you know yourself? And I just want to mention another little story that's got a bearing on ownership. I don't remember when it was. It was many, many years ago when AIDS first came out. The very first week that there were reports of AIDS, and everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, it's a contagious disease. We're all going to get it." All kinds of rumors came about, and it was like shocking stuff. And it wasn't until today where you've got internet and so on. We had a newspaper and radio. And I was actually director of a program in a chamber of commerce, a very big one. And they looked at me to say, what are we going to do? I knew less than everybody else. We all knew the same thing in the same moment. The news came about this AIDS problem or the AIDS issue, and everybody kind of looked around. But because I happened to be the leader of that group, they looked at me. And I'll tell you, I had to overcome my own fears. First of all, I had to introspect, and I had to introspect and to determine that my fear I'm going to leave it aside, and I was going to try and do something about it. And that's where the ego, the positive side, comes and says, yeah, I'm going to fix it. I knew nothing about it. I was terrified. People saying, oh, you just, even if you drink from a glass and somebody had a restaurant, you're going to catch this thing. There were all kinds of rumors going around. And that's where we take ownership of something and say, okay, I will do what I can. But I had to show that I was, even though I knew as much as they did, as everybody else, I had to show leadership, because that's who I was. I was at the time appointed as a leader. And that's overcoming your fears. It's overcoming your anxieties. It's overcoming your doubts. It's overcoming everything. And you're thinking, how am I going to help everybody now? How am I going to do and solve not the problem, but at least how are we going to pacify everybody? How are we going to rationalize things? How can I contribute to helping? Nothing to do with me. I knew nothing about it.
Yeah, exactly what you said. In times like that, you need to push your ego aside, realize that you don't know everything, and do your research and find out from those who do know what exactly is going on. We talk about this a lot. We all have our strengths and we have our weaknesses. And part of leadership and ownership is being able to set your ego aside when you don't have those specific skills, and reaching out to your team members. Like I reach out to Lawrence and Michael and, for advice on certain things when I don't have that particular skill set. And, they don't look at me differently because I do that. I think, it's important for leaders to not make you feel like you're inadequate because you don't know something, or that you're coming to them for advice. And so, Paige put a great comment in here when we're talking about three-way calls and taking ownership of those. She made a comment that these sales reps that have been around for a while, they look at validation as a weakness, which it's not. But from a medical device sales person standpoint, we were regarded as the specialists of a sort, and we were expected to know everything about our products, and we're standing in front of doctors and we're standing in front of staff and we're expected to know everything. And it was a weakness if you said, hold on a minute, I need to call somebody and get an answer to that. Right. And so, when we're doing three-way calls, that's not what we're doing. We're not showing our inadequacy. We're bringing somebody else in that may have more experience in the business to share their thoughts on the business and what they've done in the business and successes that they've had. So, we talk about this on our team calls all the time, and it's hard to get some of these reps that have been around for a long time to really utilize three-way calls. And, there's a psychological component to that. And it takes them a while to get on board. I know for me, when, first 3-4 months I was in the business, I was like, three-way calls? What are these guys talking about, three-way calls? I don't need anybody to help me sell somebody else. I had an ego about that, and I wasn't being very successful. But once I started, getting with the program and utilizing three-way calls, that's when I started to see success. And so, those three-way calls can be very, very effective. And that comes along with what we're saying about being accountable as well. We need to be accountable to not only ourselves, but accountable to our teammates to help out with those three-way calls and get us to a point where we're comfortable with that being a part of this business.
Yeah, Dan, I totally agree. I think that the strength of the team, if you're a leader, or if we are leaders, as we are, we have to be able to lead by example. We have to be able to also recognize our own failures where we fall down, and then make it public and say, look, this is where I failed, and this is why I failed. And let everybody know that we recognize our failures, but that we can fix things as well. So I think, taking ownership and being accountable and leading by example, these are all things that are important, and we've got to put them into practice all the time. I don't know, I saw, go ahead. Somebody made a note here, I can't see it.
There's another comment Paige Jack made, that even when you're in the business, as long as she's been in the business, she still uses three-way calls because it's a new voice saying the same thing differently. And sometimes that can make a huge difference. I tell stories on our team that I've reached out to reps across the country that have already been introduced to this opportunity. And either they were, whatever they were told didn't resonate with them, or it wasn't correct, or whatever it may be. And I think that's one of the things that is very difficult in this business, is that we have multiple different teams, and the messaging's a little bit different. But I think the messaging being different is what makes those three-way calls work. As Paige said, it's just somebody. Just because I don't make a connection with somebody on a call doesn't mean if I bring somebody else into the call that they might not make a connection with that person on the call. I'm not for everybody. Lawrence isn't for everybody. Some people like me, some people don't like me. Same thing with everybody on this call, right? And so, you may come across a little bit differently than somebody else, and we need to utilize this with people. Sometimes I'll use multiple three-way calls with the same person, on different days, and just introduce them. I'll just tell them I want to introduce them to some of the folks that we have on our team, just so they see the caliber of people that we have and the people that'll be helping. And then that allows them to get different perspectives.
I used to joke about, my daughter, mainly the older one, and I'd tell her something time and again for years. I'd tell her something and go in one ear and out the other. And then she'd meet some bum on the road who's, homeless, and who would happen to say the same thing. And she'd come back and say, Dad, I just met this genius. Look what he told me. It's something you've been telling him for 10 years. So just hearing it from somebody else at that time, timing and whatever, there's a lot of different things for it. Anyway, it's 10:01. Does anybody have any comment? Anybody would like to say something? Anybody would like to add something?
Well, speaking of leveraging the team, I have a meeting coming up with a group of pharmacists. They own, 14 or 15 pharmacy locations, and they dabble in all kinds of other things. Does anyone have like a presentation or something that's tailored toward pharmacies that, they really don't, they understand obviously the scientific portion of medicine and all that kinds of things. I don't want to assume they understand it all, and obviously want to incorporate our technology, but does somebody have something like that that's been successful?
Riley, Dan's got a group of 130 pharmacies that he's working with, actually more than that. So yeah, we'll give you that.
And how about chiropractors?
Yeah, we've got all of these things.
Okay, I just need them because I have these meetings.
Okay, well, we'll fix it.
And I don't want to reinvent the wheel, so yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have all of these. We have a lot of different specialties. We've got a lot of different physicians of different specialties that are working with us, and each one has a little thing that we need to tweak a little different to the others. So yeah, we have those.
Awesome.
Does anybody want to add anything else? If not, Dan, you want to any other statement?
I think I'm all statemented out for today.
You know, I'll just say, I find it interesting that on so many of these calls, we talk on a number of different topics, but many times it finds its way back around to the effectiveness of three-way calls and how important they are.
Yeah, kind of all the things that we've been talking about, that Lawrence and I talk about anyway, they're all kind of intertwined. We go back to ego, and we go back to commitment, and we go back to accountability, and all of these different things. Three-way calls obviously are super important in this business, and that was one of those things, Jim, that it took me a while to get my head wrapped around that. I just, for whatever reason, I was resistant to it. Probably because it was just outside of my comfort zone. I felt like I needed to know everything, but like Paige said, it's getting other people in front of them that may create that bond or get that point across to what we're doing.
Yeah, well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say your transparency on that very topic, I think is helpful to all of us, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, one thing that Michael Cook does a lot is if he has a medical device rep call with a medical device rep, and he hears, total joint replacement or Zimmer Biomed or whatever it may be, he calls me on the spot and says, "Hey, can you jump on a call with me?" Because, they're feeling a lot of pain right now, and I know what those pain points are, so I can really speak to that, and I create a bond with those people really, really quickly because I speak their language, and I know what they're going through right now. So, I can be a very effective on those calls. There's other calls that I'm not as effective on, but it's as we say, utilize the people on your team that have the strengths that you don't have, and recognize your weaknesses and put your ego aside.
Yep. Very good.
All right.
Good. Well, thanks everybody. Dan, thank you.
Thanks,
Jim,
Lawrence.
thank you for the input. Page also, thank you. And Riley also. Thanks everybody for being on the call. Thanks, Dan. And we'll look forward to seeing you next Friday on our call. And then there's a call on Monday, which is always very good with Scott Bennett and Dr. Mansi Shah and got a blank on Wednesday.
Ken Nelson.
Ken Nelson, because there's Ken Nelson and Mansi Shaw on Wednesday. Those are fabulous calls as well. So, and also Dr. McCoy has been on those as well. So, anyway, thanks for being on the call, everybody. Look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Yep. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, Dan.
Bye bye.